live in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Aforza Vertical AI podcast. We've got a very exciting episode in store today. We're going to be exploring the vertical AI opportunity with our friends from another industry vertical. This week, we're joined by Carsten Schaltz, the co-founder and CPO from Stotles, and they help private companies grow their public sector business. We're also joined by Aforza's co-founder and CEO, Dominic Donato. So before we get started, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thanks, Andy.
Great to have you on. So let's kick off with some introductions. Carsten, I'd love to hear your personal story, your background, and a little bit about the focus of what you do.
100%. So I'm Carsten, as Andrew mentioned, Chief Product Officer here at Stotles. I guess maybe super quick background. As you can probably tell, not from the UK. Grew up in Canada. Started my career in management consulting, so spent a good number of years at BCG. Kind of figured that wasn't my forever thing. Always had an interest in product, so used that as a bit of an excuse. I had sort of itchy feet as well, so used that as an excuse to hop the pond and kind of dive into the product world. I kind of spent some time with another sort of data-driven SaaS company, which was then called Doodle. Has now been kind of merged and acquired, but and then also did my MBA at London Business School, and that's where I met my co-founders John and Taj, and thankfully in that program, lots of kind of structural free time if you choose to kind of optimize for that, and so we used a lot of our time in that program to get Stotles off the ground, and yeah, we've been kind of going ever since. I guess maybe just like rolling forwards from the beginning of Stotles, like all three of us had different kind of flavors of exposure to the public sector world. And, we all saw it from slightly different angles, slightly different ways, but had sort of shared underlying feelings about it. And kind of the main sort of themes that stuck out to us were like, it's this hidden giant. People don't think about governments buying stuff from businesses, but it's a huge, huge economic flow, like 14% of GDP. And so the fact that it's so big, but doesn't necessarily occupy that much mind share in the general public was like, that's interesting to us. I mean, secondly, from more of a motivational point of view, it's super important, right? It's our schools, our roads, our hospitals, like the foundation of what everything else is built upon. So in terms of, getting through the rough days, like that's a strong motivator for us. And then I think the last point is we all just saw there's so much value to be realized. Like there's so much opportunity to help drive kind of more efficiency, more value in the space. And so all of those like big fuzzy topics gave us the sort of motivation to say like, okay, this is the space that we want to live in and we want to make a dent in. And so basically fast forward, lots of kind of discussions, exploration, all that kind of stuff. And what we're doing is we're building the operating system for doing business with government. So we help the private businesses in order to understand, navigate, and be successful in engaging with the public sector. And so there's a whole journey there from like strategy, sales and marketing, bidding, compliance, finance. There's like a whole journey that is quite unique to this space. And our ambitions are to help private sector companies to navigate each of those steps. So yeah, that's the high level. In terms of maybe some of the more specifics of like who are our users and like what do they actually use Stotles for, the areas that we have really doubled down on to begin with is the kind of sales and marketing and strategy steps. So we take a huge amount of information that is made public by these different PubSec organizations, and it's just sort of scattered across the entire internet. It's very unstructured, and we help go-to-market teams in order to make the most of that information to figure out, okay, what should I focus on? Which accounts are actually going to need what we provide? How do I best engage with them in order to help them just be more productive and kind of more targeted with their time?
How did you get your name, like Stottle? Like, where does that come from?
Great question. So we have to give John, our CEO, all the credit for this one. He actually incorporated the Stotles name like 3 years before we actually started trading as a company.
Okay.
So that it had been kind of like churning in his brain for quite a while. But it's based off of Aristotle. So one of his many kind of posits is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And so there's kind of many different ways that that's relevant to us in terms of like helping throughout the entire journey. And I think the most kind of on the nose is like there's all this fragmented data that's out there. And when you bring it together and you make it useful, then it's
Okay, clever.
yeah. So we'd like the name, despite it getting mispronounced many different times and ways. You nailed it, by the way. But we like it because of kind of what it means.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
I mean, Dom, just on that Carsten there talked a lot about, almost the fragmented data, the stovepipe solutions, and ultimately, connecting sales and marketing the front office. And I guess there's a lot of parallels we can draw, from that out of Aforza and why you started Aforza in the same way, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of, I guess we're going to get into eventually into vertical AI, but I was just thinking as Carsten was talking, like there's so many parallels. Like we're in a completely different vertical, we're in consumer products, but it's a similar sort of problems like islands of data, not joined up, silos, like the potential to unlock it all. It's probably common themes actually between our companies. And I was also kind of thinking actually, like what you were describing in the public sector, in like few points in my career, I've tried to deal with the public sector, and the sheer volume of where do you start and the process and the rules feels overwhelming. But like you said, 14% of GDP is public sector buying from private sector. So it's like staggering amounts of money. Yeah,
Absolutely. It's and I think so many businesses just discount it from the get-go because they're like,
yeah,
it's different, it's hard, like we're just gonna kind of stay over here.
yeah,
And I think probably for some businesses that does like there's the right time for any given business to like really commit to jumping in, because it's not something where you come in and like a couple months later you're gonna be kind of like seeing real end of the pipeline results. Like it's inherently a slower process than in the private sector, but yeah, for sure. And actually, with kind of thinking about Aforza, I remember, I think I mentioned this when we spoke before, Dom, but I remember, back in my BCG days, there was another team that we were sat next to that were pulling their hair out, trying to like crunch all this data in order to do promotions for a big kind of retailer in Canada. And it was one of those things where I just thought like, surely they have this kind of like, why is this guy who has never done promotions before, but is just willing to pull like 18 hours days, like figuring out how to do all this and needing to like get the biggest machine that we had in the office possible to crunch through all this stuff for this client. So yeah, totally. I see so many parallels in terms of like, there's all this data. People don't really know exactly what to do with it.
Carsten, as you were saying, like 14% of GDP is the public sector buying from the private sector is massive. Another stat to give you one from our world is the top 50 consumer product companies in the world, their combined revenues are like $2 trillion. And they spend about 200 to $300 billion on promotions. And it's nuts, but like they don't even completely know if they work. According to McKinsey, 70% of those promotions, they've no idea if there's an ROI. It's like that guy you were talking about there somewhere in like, the back room with the spreadsheet doing 18-hour day, trying to figure out if it's in the right place. They know if they don't do the promotions, things will go wrong, but they can't be completely certain what and how to do it.
it's those things where it's like super hard to measure the outcome, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm sure that you guys have like a science and a point of view on it, but to somebody just walking off the street, it's like, well, how was this promotion successful? It's like it takes some
Yeah.
non-obvious math to kind of figure that out. And similarly, like in government, it's like, oh, hey, we spent 200 million on this giant IT transformation. Like, was it successful? I mean, a lot of people are probably going to feel one way or the other about it, but like, quantifiably, was it successful? That's not super easy to answer, and I think that's
Yeah.
where a lot of this sort of opportunity and kind of this like fuzziness can be attacked and kind of like improved, basically.
Excellent.
Mm.
So before we get into the vertical AI discussion, just looking at a vertically focused solution and what you do, why do your users need a vertical solution? What makes their day job in buying, partnering, selling different in the public sector to other businesses?
Yeah, it's a great question. And maybe like my sort of thinking is like at the highest level, there needs to be a reason why something vertical should exist. Otherwise, it's just kind of um, duplicative. And I think in those use cases, in those industries, there either needs to be data which is unique to that space, or processes that need to be so different that the usual kind of tools and pipes and workflows won't suffice. And in the public sector, I think at different points in the value chain, both are true. Um, and the reason why is that governments value different things from businesses when they're buying stuff. Um, so, businesses are obviously working to optimize their own performance, and they have a huge amount of latitude in how they do that. They can buy whatever they want from whoever they want within the bounds of the law, which, like as Stotles, I could go and buy a bunch of servers from my uncle if I wanted to. I don't have any uncles that sell servers, but in theory I could, and that would be totally fine. That's our decision, and we'll kind of either be successful or not. And that's kind of like our uh our decision. In the public sector world, the values are a bit different. They very much value transparency to keep everybody accountable, to make sure that our kind of tax pounds are going to the right place, which is, I think, totally appropriate. Fairness in who wins what. Like there needs to be a certain amount of proportionality where like small businesses should be included where it's relevant, and also there's no personal favoritism or anything going on there, and that again obviously feels right. And then lastly, reliability. It just needs to work. It's like the foundation of our society. We can't have our overpass bridges working 95% of the time. And so that just drives different behaviors and processes and needs in this space. So if you take, one of our customers, Salesforce, obviously has many different teams, most of them selling to private organizations, but one particular one selling to the public sector. And in the public sector, that public sector team, there's a huge amount of data that is pumped out into the world by these organizations because they need to be transparent, and they don't have any purpose-built tools in order to corral that and tell them what they need to know. And then when it comes to kind of the processes that they need to go through, there's extremely kind of specific and complex routes to market where, depending on what type of thing you're buying and through what channel, there's different requirements, different steps. It's like this giant like flow chart is what I picture. And that's all there because that's how they try to be fair. They say, in order to be fair, you have to go through step 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 3A, and if that, then 7B. And so all of this like data and this process that exists in the public sector means that the classic CRMs, outreach tools, marketing automation tools, like everything that is in a classic go-to-market tool stack, doesn't really host these data objects and these processes in a way. And so these teams need to just kind of either jerry-rig their existing tools, like we've seen folks spend inordinate sums of money to create custom objects in Salesforce in order to host that type of information, or they're just kind of like muddling through with spreadsheets and trading back and forth emails and that type of stuff. So that's maybe a long-winded way of saying, because the government values different things, it trickles down into the actual on-the-ground actions being quite different, the priorities being quite different, and the tools just don't accommodate that.
We completely understand that. It's a bit like saying, do I just take generic CRM systems and try to use it in my consumer products company? And you can kind of do that, sort of fumble your way through it by configuring and customizing forever, build up loads of technical debt, and you just end up with dissatisfied users and ineffective systems, and everyone complains about it. And then you spend a fortune trying to unwind all that. Or do you go with a vertical SaaS solution that's completely tuned to be 99% of what you need straight out of the box, right? And obviously there's always some sort of tuning, etc., going on. But it's like when you were describing that, like the last 10 years of my career is being in vertical SaaS. I completely knew what you were talking about. And the funny thing is, like, it's still like well, actually, more and more people get this because the number of vertical SaaS companies and the vertical AI companies is now like growing rapidly. And yeah, no, I didn't. Your little talk there completely resonated with me. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and I mean, I think in our space there's an interesting dynamic where like these horizontal tools, broadly speaking, are still going to exist, right? Especially the kind of
Yeah.
company level ones. Like the majority of our customers, they sell to both public sector and private sector. So they're going to need a horizontal CRM, right? That's like a given.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the whole other half of the business is just going to be left with, it's like, why the hell do I have a public sector CRM? I'm selling to banks or whatever. But so in our situation, we need to make sure that we play nicely from like a technical product point of view with all of those kind of horizontal tools that are just, it makes sense for them to be there when you look at it from like the CEO level point of view.
I can also relate to that. But for example, you might find that a customer might use like, Salesforce Service Cloud for handling customer service cases and their SLAs and their response rules and things. And then of course, but for the specialist areas of like deep vertical applicability, completely different, But which actually was interesting to me because as you were talking, I was actually had a conversation with one of our industry advisors, and I was explaining our AI strategy, and their point of reference was Microsoft Copilot or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I was explaining, well, look, like all those things are great. Like, yeah, I can generate an email, or here's another AI engine generating a microsite, or whatever it might be. But when I talk about vertical SaaS and vertical AI, like those tools are not going to produce your consumer products perfect order. They're not going to produce, like if you were like, you wouldn't use general AI to go do a medical diagnosis. So it doesn't apply, like, in fact, if somebody was saying to you to do that, it'd be kind of worrying. When you want
So
people vertical AI, SaaS, vertical AI, the specificity becomes very, very important. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, and like, are we going to get there one day where there's just like, a Google-esque thing, and you're like, oh, you can ask it to craft the perfect promotion strategy, and then in the next thing say, tell me which opportunities are most relevant to me in the public sector, and it'll be able to do both. But for sure, we're not there yet. And if I were to kind of make a guess, it's like we're a good long ways away from that. And the steps, the way that I sort of think about it is like, to get to real bona fide useful production use cases, it's like we need to start small and start specific, and then once we're kind of comfortable that we kind of go bigger and more general and more flexible, because the more flexible stuff is super interesting. But I think that in most kind of industries, in most use cases, it hasn't taken off as this like, this is absolutely killer, must use piece of my kind of like business tooling.
Just on that,
I think vertical AI changes that a bit, Carsten, because I think that most people today probably like if you're like a, I don't know, a sales guy or a customer service agent, you probably go to Chat GPT or something. Well, and um you know, like help draft me an email or help write, like, you know, help me write an email to my local council to complain about my parking ticket or something, right? Everyone's probably got that sort of Gen AI use case. And I think that obviously there is value for that, it makes you more productive. But I think that, for example, the use cases we're seeing in Aforza now is the ability to say, like, you know what, I need to reroute all my visit plans for this week based on a new priority and do it for me automatically. Like that's something in traditional CRM systems is absolutely achievable, but involves you spending a lot of time navigating the UI and, you know, trying to figure out, like, you know, where the hell it all is. And it's obviously achievable, but it takes time. The fact that you can literally say that to something which processes it through AI and just does it all through the same APIs that already exist, ironically, in the end, you know, I think the gains could be, well, I don't think could be, will be actually like quite well, certainly very, very impactful. I don't know, 25% more productive, you know.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like, I guess the difference that I was sort of trying to convey was like with something that is vertically focused,
Yeah.
the effort and the kind of consideration that can be given to like what are the specific needs in this use case can be so much more kind of attuned to. Whereas, you know, a Chat GPT, they're trying to do, like, they are accommodating for everything all at once, which is
Yeah.
obviously amazing in its own right, in its like
Yeah.
broad-based applicability. But, you know, for example, if I asked ChatGPT to like, hey, summarize for me the key priorities of DEFRA, the public sector organization, it's going to give me something probably pretty accurate, probably pretty general. But if we go and do that in Stotles, we already understand what are the topics, what are the areas that you really care about, and we'll have access to more structured data that will allow us to, with that same level of ease of just ask a question, get a response, but get something that's much more attuned to the specific user, because we understand them more closely within the context of this kind of specific use case, and richer answers because of the hard work that we've done to create a more structured database, where, you know, even if the broad-based flexibility of AI, like the the ability to reach into that structured data just adds another kind of like dimension, another level that allows us to do that. Like, and I'm sort of gonna make up an example in your space as well, but you know, if it says like, hey, suggest how we should improve this promotions campaign, if you can reference all of the past promotions that a company has run, obviously you're going to be able to produce more kind of helpful results than if you're sort of just picking away from generalities.
We literally do that demo use case, fun enough. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, you could spawn exactly how it works. Yeah. Do you find, Carsten, are your customers like the AI is obviously things are moving really, really fast. Do you find your customers are ready for it? Do they know what to do? Is it a bit of like, are we teaching each other, customers and vendors? Like, how are you finding it?
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, there's a huge amount of excitement. And
Yeah.
I think like people are really interested in engaging with something that like feels new. It's like a new way of engaging with a product with software. I guess like our point of view is that it should be making things easier. It should be making things even more um, obvious than, to your kind of point around for a person, it should be easier to say, tell me which promotions generated the most revenue over the past 3 months, as opposed to either navigating some filters or writing some SQL at kind of like the most lowest
Yeah.
level.
Yeah.
Um, and so our what we strive to do is to make it such that like it's just a part of the product experience and it continues to level up the product experience. Um, I do think that something that we for sure need to be careful of, and I think that everybody needs to be careful of. And at this point is pretty broadly understood in the kind of like general public, is that generative AI is not at the point where it's going to give you a perfectly accurate result every single time. Um, so obviously signposting that is important, um, and working to mitigate that as much as possible is like super important. Um, but I think that's one area where there's like a bit of user understanding that is important, so that people just like don't take things 100% at face value and then run with it and then kind of get caught with their pants down later.
Trusting it is important. Yeah. It's
Yeah, yeah,
kind of
yeah.
funny because the more human-like we make this stuff, the fallibility of it creeps in. It's almost like our society's produced this incredible thing. Let's dumb it down back to a computer if we can to make it repeatable. Yeah, quite funny. Do
Totally,
you
totally.
think? So sorry, because you're making me really think about this. Do you think the public sector is ready for AI? Are you seeing
Yeah,
any OJEC projects or something come out in the chain yet?
it's so it's a it's a good question because like what I just said earlier, right?
Yeah,
The one of the core kind of um priorities or values is reliability.
yeah,
And the classic uh sort of implication of that is that in what the government does and how it buys is very risk averse. And on the face of it, that makes sense because like it just needs to work, like I said.
yeah,
Um, if a company, small or large, buys something and kind of it becomes this, it delivers poor results, like it can be broadly impacting. Uh, but it with the government, I think it's even more. So for sure, I think the bar is going to be higher. And in order to see something that's super broadly rolled out, I think it will take longer and probably should take longer because it needs to work basically. Um, what I will say is there is a lot of interest and appetite from within the public sector. Crown Commercial Services has a whole artificial intelligence framework that public sector organizations can buy through. I know that there's lots of the Cabinet Office has kind of published these specific notes around how AI could, should, or shouldn't be used in crafting bids. And I know that there
interesting.
are a bunch of organizations that are kicking off kind of like pilots, alphas, explorations in that area. So um, I think that like pretty much everywhere else, there's a lot of interest, a lot of excitement. There's this element of unknown and therefore a bit of kind of like I don't think skepticism is the right word, but just like caution. Um, but I think it's probably warranted in our space.
I think I'm going to take a little bit of a guess here and say in a 12 to 18 month time frame, I think the adoption of AI will be so pervasive that it'll have economic ripples because it'll be like the number of people that get hired will change, the productivity of people will change. Like there'll be companies that don't adopt it stand real risk of going extinct because of their competitors will have adopted it and will get like
Mhm.
I think the same thing probably will ripple into the public sector because I think especially around the Western democracies, right? Everyone's got the same problems of like aging populations,
Mhm.
incredible budget challenges, taxes to deal with, and then they have to find a way to do more with less. And then actually, AI is probably an incredible way to achieve it
So,
once you have those safeguards, I guess that you. But there must be a lot of things where those safeguards probably don't matter so much. Like maybe
yeah,
things that are not life and death. You
it's
know,
interesting. I'm sure that there are people out there who have spent a whole lot more time than I have thinking about like what are the best use cases for AI in public sector now versus kind of down the road versus in the kind of like
yeah,
distant future. Um, but for sure, I mean, there are so many areas where it just feels like it should work. I have gone through my wife and I have gone through a couple of different visa processes, and just interfacing with the government in order to understand what's going on. Like, first of all, how do I apply in a way that is correct, and you know all of that. Like, it's for somebody who doesn't think about visas ever and then you jump into it, it's like it can be confusing, um, especially when you're trying to do it in the middle of Brexit. But that's a personal scar. And similar to the whole Klarna story about how they've managed to basically move a huge amount of their support traffic to AI kind of driven conversations to resolution, that feels like something where it inherently should fit. It's like a super repeatable type of task with slight variations, but it's all more or less based off of the language and the kind of specific questions of individuals. But similar, like kind of what I was saying, if Klarna does or doesn't refund something, that's a much lower impact versus if it the you know um, the home office chatbot says that you are or are not approved for a visa. So 100%, there's a huge amount of opportunity, and there are probably some use cases which are much more kind of like forgiving.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a wide open playing field. Um, well, I guess one thing that I would say is like one of the reasons that we've leaned into it uh, is that in our use case of working with go-to-market teams and particularly salespeople, um, the level of precision required is not that of making a medical diagnostic or shoring up IT system from a cyber attack or something like that, right? There's a huge amount of probability associated with the sales process overall. And so even, if we are able to highlight highly relevant, high probability of success opportunities and data points to salespeople, like it really doesn't matter if it is the 100% correct stack ranked list. Because if we're able to do that in a fraction of the time that it would have taken them to do it anyways, they're still massively ahead. So yeah, I
Carsten,
think, yeah, go ahead.
that word use case, I think, is so important, and we really see it as like a building block to vertical AI. And
Mhm.
You touched on it a bit there, but are there some tangible use cases you're really seeing rise now for Stotles in terms of where you see vertical AI fit in? Any examples you can give that are really, getting you traction in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are two, I would say, broad categories that we think of it in, like, because obviously we are working with a huge amount of data, and a big part of what we do is getting the right stuff out of that data. So we think about it as both extractive AI and generative AI. So the terms are more leaning towards, what are we using them for, as opposed to like what is the underlying technology. But so on the kind of extractive side of things, again, it's really about translating human intent, which usually comes in the form of like a human phrased question to responses. So we have this kind of Q&A tool where if you go and you look at the page for any public sector organization, so let's say you go and look at the Home Office, you can ask a question like, hey, what database technologies have this, does this organization use? And that's when we'll go and we'll translate that kind of human question into a query that will go and pull the relevant information from all of our structured data, and then translate that structured data into a kind of like human format response where we're referencing all the different sources and all that kind of stuff. Which, that technical technique we obviously didn't invent, but applying it to our structured data in our space, we think is quite novel. So that's kind of on the extractive side of things. On the generative side of things, I mean, we are in like a sales go-to-market use case, and so just translating those insights of buyer intent or opportunity into something that a user can go and just put out into the market. So like email outreach is sort of a pretty kind of classic example in the sales space, but it's bridging more of the gap because we can reach all the way to the kind of like source data and then reference, okay, who are you and what do you do? And then use that to create a very personalized draft. So that's one. And then the other, which is newer ground for us, it's not kind of like fully available, but we're working on, is actually the crafting of bids themselves, right? That's kind of the final step in the process before, well, there can be kind of negotiations, demos and stuff, but like zooming out, that's kind of right at the end where you've built a relationship, the organization is going to market, and you now need to put together this. It's pretty dense and it can be a big lift to generate these, it's like 10 questions, 500 words each, and it needs to be right. So using our data and what we know about our users to help them create a first draft that just gets the ball rolling is another example that we're super excited about.
Carsten, have you seen there's a lot of dialogue about this, and I think I believe this as well, is that our metadata and our solutions, it's kind of like our competitive moat. Like when you take the metadata we all have in our vertical solutions and apply AI with it, that is hard to compete with, because who else could do this cross-silo understanding and navigation? Like you said, I think one of the signals that maybe was Andy, generative AI gives you exactly what it can see in a general answer, but when you have that.
Exactly, it's only as good as what you feed it, right? Yeah. So if we're able to be more specific and deeper in what we feed it, which is just kind of like that data that we're sitting on, then the quality of what we're able to put in front of somebody and the kind of distance from the ideal outcome can be a lot shorter.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah.
In terms of the business value, I mean, Carsten, you used the word productivity, a while back, and we've been looking at that, the sort of the productivity gains from an Aforza side as well. And if you if you look a little bit forward about the way things used to be done, the use cases, the business processes, and what the future can look like. I mean, we're not just talking about a 10% improvement. We're talking about game-changing numbers, like night and day from what they've been before. And so is productivity really the value driver you're leaning on with your customers? Is there anything else that you see as a key area of differentiation?
Great question. And like the kind of core, the simple answer is like, yes, productivity, and specifically because we're working with go-to-market teams, like revenue productivity is the phrase that we use, and kind of like in a more mathematical term, it's how many opportunities, how many like late stage deals, and at the end of the day wins can a team produce given the amount of resources that you put into it, whether that be actual size of the team or marketing dollars or whatever it is. And that kind of ratio, that kind of value driver is something that we've been pushing towards since day one, since before the whole kind of AI explosion. And these tools we're just super excited about because we think it's going to allow us to lean even further into it. The way that we think about it, especially with the classic kind of sales use case, like if you think about a BDR, they are often making this trade-off between like, do I spend time to find higher probability, like basically hotter leads, better content to reach out to them? Do I do that kind of like desk research to create better outreach? Or do I use that time to just go and do outreach? And there's this like tension between it, right? Either end of the spectrum is like not really attractive. You can't just be kind of like crafting the perfect outreach, but sending 2 emails a day, and equally, you don't want to just be spamming garbage out into the world. And we think that, well, what we have always been striving towards, and what we think that AI will help us to like really accelerate into, is to break that trade-off. So we're going to help you to create something that's very personalized, very topical, but we're going to allow you to do it very quickly so you can move on to the next and the next and the next. And just honestly, even from the point of view of the recipients of this, like the buyers in this market, public sector organizations, we really hope that it just means that the right people will be talking to the right people more often. Like we want to make the connections that are going to result in somebody saying, you know what, you guys can really add value in our organization. Because at the end of the day, those are the sales conversations that you want to have, right? You don't want to be, pushing a boulder uphill or like talking to someone who doesn't actually need what you have. Like when you find that match, it just flows like water. So the more that we can help people to make those connections, that's kind of, I think, where everybody wins. And we think that using AI to kind of parse through all the data that we have is going to help us do that even more.
Excellent, thanks. I mean, Dominic, reflecting on this episode today, I'm honestly gobsmacked by just how many parallels we draw between consumer products and the public sector and our focuses as companies. I mean, everything from the siloed data we deal with, the overload of spreadsheets, the ability to pull those processes together, I think has really stood out for me. Anything you want to add to that?
I think the thing it just says, as we come towards the end, is like, whether it be public sector, whether it be consumer products, and probably we could find, in fact, I know we're going to talk to other vertical SaaS companies in completely different areas. I think when we go to those conversations, we're going to find similar themes. Siloed data is now being joined up. Vertical SaaS goes very deep use cases. The productivity in terms of time efficiency, but also the effectiveness of people in their go-to-market teams or whatever team, frankly, I think is going to jump up dramatically. And I think the only thing I'd like to just say is, just to become saying is, I think it's all going to, what happens in tech normally is people overestimate what happens in a short time and then underestimate what happens in a decade. Like
100%.
to me, like this is definitely one of those seismic shifts yeah, sure, like we're all going to get up and do the same things tomorrow, but maybe 12 to 18 months from now, things are going to look different. I think the business plans tech companies have will look different because we'll staff them differently. Our customers are going to change their behaviors because they're going to have, well, first of all, everyone's going to find 20 to 30% time savings. Then that's going to translate rapidly into an effectiveness change or cost savings as headcount adjusts. Like I give it 12 to 18 months, and I believe that it's not just the generative AI technologies, it's the vertical AI. It's what Carsten's doing, it's what we're doing, and many of the other speakers we've been having this series. You're going to find that these niches, which by the way, in the case of consumer goods, like that $2 trillion sales
Niche.
market, all of a sudden it's going to be very different. So I think it's kind of scary, but it's kind of exciting. There's a lot of opportunity. I think the trick with this kind of stuff is to probably to not like don't fight it because that's pointless. It's coming, right? Like you can't stop progress. The trick is how to like channel it, ride that wave, maximize it, be on the winning side, you know?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, one of
Which
the
by the way
reasons.
is our side, Carsten. You and me.
Yeah, totally. I think like from our point of view, like I personally I love B2B because it's just, about
Yeah.
solving people's problems. If you solve the problems and add value, like things are gonna go well. And I think that so long as folks like us just keep focusing on solving the problems of the people in our vertical and using the best tools available, it sounds simple and kind of like boring, but um, I I find it hard to see how that's going to lead us astray.
Mhm.
And I guess maybe just like another small point is in terms of how things change uh, a lot over a longer period of time versus a little in the short. You worded it better than I did, but user expectations are going to change as well, right? Like what
It's true.
people see from ChatGPT or everything else that's out there. People are going to start to expect those experiences everywhere, whether it be a horizontal tool or a vertical one, whether it's a extremely large corporation or a startup. So, people don't care at the end of the day. They want to get their jobs done. They want to kind of just like make their lives easier. So, yeah, like you said, a little bit scary, a little bit exciting, but that's why we're here, right?
Certainly not boring.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Great to have you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really enjoyed the chat. And let's keep trading notes since we have so much in common, but we're kind of in these parallel universes, parallel verticals, if you will.
Yeah.
So yeah, just keen to keep in touch and keep trading notes.
Thanks, Carsten.
Thank you both. Thanks, gentlemen. And to everybody listening, please stay tuned for more discussions on how AI is shaping your vertical industries. And we'll be back with more next week. And as Dominic alluded to, lots of different discussions with different vertical AI companies. So thank you, Dominic. Thank you, Carsten. And we'll speak to you all next week.